joining us on News Center Maine Plus, I'm Vivien Leigh. Maine continues to work to stem the flow of PFAS chemicals into the environment and into the products we use every day. In 2026, a new law went into effect banning the intentional use of PFAS in products from being sold on our shelves. But as advocates have discovered, some of those products are still being sold. News Center Maine's Pearl Small has the details.
In the aisles of most Maine stores, you'll find items with PFAS-free labels.
We're very excited to see manufacturers starting to remove PFAS and publicly state that there's not PFAS in products.
The labels are the result of manufacturers complying with the expansion of a Maine law that went into effect on January 1st, banning intentionally added PFAS in household items. Emily Carey Perez de Alejo, Executive Director for Defend Our Health, says it's a relief to see this change, noting that PFAS labeling has historically lacked transparency. In most cases, chemical disclosures require scanning a QR code that links to a website, one that may not clearly indicate whether that specific product contains PFAS.
Consumer protection really starts with making it easy for us to shop without having to do 8,000 gallons worth of research before we buy dental floss and before we buy a shirt.
But for some products, Perez de Alejo says that research might still be necessary. As of Monday, her group had a list of 13 PFAS-containing household products from 11 different retailers still available to be shipped to Maine. And some items in stores have labels like clean ceramic or toxic-free, but don't specify whether that means they are free of PFAS.
Bans are tough. Sometimes it'll get rid of one chemical and replace it with another. Sometimes chemicals can exist in different states, so you might ban one version of it and not the other.
At the Shaw Institute, senior research scientist Dr. Charles Rolski says they will help the state and organizations like Defend Our Health test products where necessary to ensure compliance or point out new health hazards.
The best thing that we can do is take research and turn it into something educational so we can inform people.
And Perez de Alejo says the good thing about state bans is that manufacturers often change the product nationwide.
There will be a lot of testing and a lot of checking that we'll need to do, but this law is going to make products safer in Maine, and it's going to make products safer across the country.
Regulators say they are working with advocates and are monitoring the situation. Meanwhile, dozens of farmers across Maine are still dealing with the aftermath of PFAS contamination. Now, the PFAS Fund has distributed millions of dollars in resources and programs, a safety net of hope in an uncertain future.
It still feels kind of yucky. Where do you go from here?
Until late last year, Doretta and her husband Ted Colburn operated an organic produce farm in Oxford County. They are still trying to cope after finding low levels of PFAS chemicals in their water. The source, industrial sludge, spread as fertilizer on parts of their 60-acre farm, a practice that happened in the 1990s, long before they took over.
It's been in the family since 1906. I mean, my husband's mother was born there. So there's such history there and sentiment there that we don't want to have to leave it.
Is labeling your hay lots.
The Colburns attended a meeting at the Maine Agricultural Trade Show to learn the latest about an ongoing state investigation. So far, the Department of Environmental Protection has found 111 farms with unsafe PFAS levels. Regulators plan to test another 400 sites over the next year that may be contaminated.
There are currently 6 farms that have closed operations, so that have ceased to farm in the state, and 3 that have significantly downsized.
The PFAS Fund has provided over $2.5 million in loans, infrastructure, and income replacement relief. It has also awarded $3 million in research grants for 7 different projects, including looking for ways to detect PFAS in chicken and eggs and new technology to break down the chemicals in soil. Free blood tests and mental health counseling are available to several hundred families who have been exposed. The Maine CDC is checking in with patients who have high levels of these chemicals in their blood.
To have a conversation to try to identify exposure pathways, to minimize further exposure, and to provide guidance for that individual's physician related to potential future monitoring.
The fund has already bought one contaminated farm and plans to buy another property sometime this year. Doretta is worried about her family's exposure to the chemicals and plans to have blood tests. She and her husband left the meeting feeling thankful that there might be a way forward.
They're willing to listen and be supportive and understanding.
For their farm, possibly in the future. As Maine deals with the PFAS crisis, a UMaine senior has tracked the state's response over the past few years. Now his class project could be used by other states to draft laws to help address the harmful chemicals. It all started as an assignment for Eddie Nakami, an undergraduate in UMaine's Honors College.
Everyone has to do a term paper in the class.
That work led him to study PFAS, toxic compounds he's been concerned about since high school. He looked into how Maine is handling contamination from these so-called forever chemicals. The compounds have turned up in wells, farmland, food, and livestock. Nakami documented every policy and bill addressing PFAS chemicals. He met personally with state regulators in Augusta and found that the state gives support across the board to people affected by contamination.
To identify exposure pathways,
Such as the PFAS Fund, which provides financial assistance, farm buyouts, blood testing, and other efforts to ensure access to clean water.
The Maine DEP has done so much work with helping community water systems and private well owners install treatment systems if they find contamination.
Nakami found that Maine had the most laws in the country about PFAS, but also saw that there was still a major gap.
That there was all of this information out there about PFAS, but no one had compiled it into one frame of reference.
I was the one who maybe pushed him a little bit to say, you know, this could be more than a paper. I think we should try to make this available to the broader public.
Nakami worked under the guidance of Rachel Chapman, an associate professor of sustainable agriculture at UMaine, who gave him the original assignment. That term paper has become a blueprint for other states dealing with PFAS contamination.
It's not just a problem in Maine. This is a problem all across the country, and something that local governments are really going to need to step up in addressing until we can get a stronger federal response.
Nakami hopes his latest project will help prevent chemicals from entering schools' wastewater systems and reduce harmful contamination. On Mount Desert Island, scientists are exploring a low-cost method to filter the toxic chemicals from groundwater. It's a very porous, charcoal-like substance known for trapping toxic PFAS compounds. Scientists say biochar could be the solution to preventing it from entering the environment.
It's just combusted organic materials.
MDI Biological Laboratory Associate Professor Jane Disney is partnering with scientists, researchers in northern Tilth. The organic waste recycling company is leading efforts to use biochar to bind the chemicals in soil, reducing its transfer to crops and groundwater. Using a $50,000 grant, scientists are developing biochar bags as a low-cost and effective way to prevent the spread of the compounds.
It will drain through the bag, contact the biochar in the bag.
MDI Biolab postdoctoral researcher Rich Hilliard says the bags would be similar to dewatering bags used at construction sites to filter sediment, silt, and pollutants.
You could potentially use biochar bags in series to achieve a higher level of removal.
After regulatory approval, researchers plan to deploy the bags at a culvert in Acadia National Park. The downstream pipe is discharging contaminated water into Somes Sound. Elevated PFAS levels have been detected in tidal mudflats, clams, and crabs. The PFAS-contaminated groundwater is linked to MDI High School and to neighboring residential wells, and may be due to cleaning supplies and floor wax. The school and well owners now have water filtration systems, but Disney wanted to do more to remove the toxic chemicals.
That gave us hope that there was a way to intercept and, and maybe prevent PFAS from getting into the salt marsh, into the clam flat.
Maine Laboratories, the state's first PFAS testing facility, recently rebranded as PFAS Laboratories to reflect the company's growing national reach. The Norridgewock-based lab is lending its expertise to the project. Katie Richards, the CEO and co-founder, says the testing will also screen for TFA, a persistent short-chain compound found everywhere and not removable from the environment.
How much PFAS is that biochar actually accumulating, and testing the water that's coming into it and testing the water that's on the other side that's coming out post-filter.
Now the lab is also running a pilot study in Tremont to see how these toxic chemicals impact homeowners' blood and their health. In recent years, scientists found elevated levels of PFAS chemicals at 3 Hancock County schools, including Tremont Consolidated School on Mount Desert Island. All the schools now use water filtration systems, but later tests found the toxic compounds in 70 private wells in the town, which has about 1,500 residents.
15%, 17% have PFAS in their drinking water over the 20 nanogram per liter limit that the state is operating under right now. Do just a finger prick?
Jane Disney, a scientist and associate professor of environmental health at MDI Biolab, recruited 20 Tremont residents for the PFAS Understanding in Local Schools and Environments, or PULSE project. Their water supplies and blood were tested for PFAS. Over time, participants will be assessed for height, weight, blood pressure, and body fat percentage.
Down here we see your specific results.
Preliminary results were recently uploaded to this platform for participants. According to PFAS blood level guidelines from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, all participants had medium exposure, which may pose health risks. The U.S. CDC reports that 89% of the U.S. population has a similar exposure level.
Every one of 20 participants in our study had some PFAS detected in their blood. And nobody was in the highest risk category.
The platform offers additional resources, including information on compounds linked to health issues, instructions for sharing blood test results with your doctor, and guidance on reducing PFAS exposure. Disney says that unlike contamination in other parts of Maine linked to wastewater sludge, local pollution appears to stem from cleaning supplies and floor wax containing the chemicals used commonly in schools and homes.
With the products they're using and what's going down the drain, the leach fields are not containing PFAS. PFAS is percolating down into groundwater.
Elevated PFAS levels were found in Sarah White's drinking water. She has since installed a water filtration system.
I think it's extremely important that this research continue and we learn a lot more about it and how it does affect the human body.
Sarah hopes to participate in the next phase of the study, which is expected to involve another 100 Tremont residents. Researchers in the future also hope to assess household products used in the community and identify PFAS-free alternatives, all to help reduce toxic exposure for well owners and the environment over time. MDI Biolab is expected to release the findings of that study to the Tremont community sometime this spring. Now, friends of Casco Bay and scientists from Bigelow Laboratories are releasing the findings of a 2-year study that tracked the toxic reach of PFAS chemicals into Casco Bay following the accidental discharge of tens of thousands of gallons of firefighting foam on the former Brunswick Naval Air Station. Over 2 years, scientists from Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences gathered nearly 600 water and sediment samples from 76 sites along the 1,000 square mile Casco Bay watershed. Scientists found that a major release of toxic firefighting foam laden with PFAS chemicals on the former Brunswick Naval Air Station was a serious environmental disaster.
So this PFAS spills like a heart attack to the system.
Ivy Frignoka, who leads the Friends of Casco Bay, worked with Bigelow Lab on the study. The results were released earlier this week. Levels of the forever chemicals in shellfish in Harpswell Cove, downstream from the spill, rose to more than 7 times the state's safety limit. State marine officials quickly closed the area to shellfish harvesting.
I was surprised to see how high it got, but the concentrations in the water were extremely high coming from upstream.
Jim Stallnecker is a biologist who leads the Maine Department of Environmental Protection's water monitoring program. After the spill, tests showed PFAS levels spiked in Atlantic silverside, a common minnow in Harpswell Cove.
Again, the fish seem to be picking up PFAS more than the shellfish.
It took about 10 weeks for PFAS levels in the water to return to pre-spill conditions. Shellfish harvesting resumed last fall after levels dropped below state action guidelines. To learn more about the spill's long-term effects, environmental chemist Christoph Apley from Bigelow Lab used chemical fingerprinting to find the foam's unique signature. He and his team tracked the forever chemicals as they moved 8 miles from the outflow at Brunswick Landing and remained in the water long after the accident.
Initially, you have an uptake, but then because Hartsville Cove is just a tidal system, it gets flushed out.
The sheer volume of the Gulf of Maine provides enough dilution to keep concentrations in most of the bay below federal safety benchmarks. However, researchers warned that these toxic chemicals don't break down or disappear. The study also found that the Kennebec River is a significant contributor to the toxic burden.
We probably need to take some of these places that are hot spots and figure out how to continuously monitor PFAS levels in the water.
State regulators are expected to release additional findings from tissue sampling from the Kennebec River. Thanks for watching on News Center Maine Plus. I'm Vivien Leigh.